Imagine a love story so powerful that it became a scandal capable of shaking the very foundations of Mount Olympus. We're talking about Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, and Ares, the god of war. A forbidden passion that not only defied divine rules, but also put the balance between the most powerful gods of the Greek pantheon at risk. But why was this betrayal so devastating? What happened between these two that even Zeus was shocked? In today's video, we'll explore the details of this story you've probably never heard, revealing the darkest secrets of the gods' hearts. Get ready to discover how a simple passion turned into the greatest scandal of Greek mythology and what consequences forever changed the fate of Olympus. Stay with us until the end, because what you'll discover will change everything you thought you knew about power, betrayal, and love among the gods. At the top of Olympus, where the gods ruled and their wills shaped the fate of the world, no figure was as fascinating as Aphrodite. The goddess of beauty and love was not just admired, she was desired, envied, and feared. Her gaze shone like the sun reflected on the sea, and her presence alone could make even the most powerful gods lose themselves in daydreams. But Aphrodite didn't belong to anyone. Her heart was as free as the waves that kiss the shore and then recede, always searching for new horizons. To love and be loved was part of her essence, but to be tied to just one bond, that was never her style. The gods, however, did not see her freedom as something beautiful. On the contrary, they believed her wild charm caused disorder. The competition for her attention sparked intrigues in Olympus, and Hera, always concerned about the stability of the gods, decided it was time to find a solution. If Aphrodite couldn't be controlled by words, she would be through marriage. The announcement came without the goddess being able to protest. She would be married to Hephaestus, the god of the forge. To others, he was hardworking and skilled, but to Aphrodite, he was nothing more than a dull husband, a prisoner who had been imposed upon her. The marriage, however, would not extinguish the fire burning within her. Aphrodite was not willing to be just the wife of one god, and that's how her story of betrayal began. Long before her name was whispered in promises of love and secret desires, Aphrodite appeared in a grand manner, worthy of her immortal beauty. Her origin, however, is shrouded in mystery, told in different ways by the gods themselves. Some say she was born from violence and chaos. Uranus, the ancient lord of the skies, was defeated by his son Cronus, who, with a relentless blow, castrated him. The blood and pieces fell into the sea, and from the white foam that formed on the turbulent waves, Aphrodite emerged, radiant as the dawn, with a beauty that would enchant the world. Carried by the wind, she reached the island of Cyprus, where the Graces received her, dressing her in gold and crowning her as the personification of desire. Others claim her origin was less tragic, but equally divine. In this version, she was the daughter of Zeus, the king of the gods, and the Titaness, Dione, born on Olympus as part of the celestial lineage. But whether she was the daughter of the waters or thunder, one thing was certain: Aphrodite carried a power that transcended immortality itself. From the moment she entered the world, she wasn't just beautiful, she was irresistible. Her mere glance made hearts falter, and her presence sparked uncontrollable passions. No being, mortal or divine, was safe from her charm, and she knew it. Created to be the apex of seduction, Aphrodite walked through Olympus like a storm of desire, leaving traces of adoration and madness wherever she went. Her beauty was not only a gift, but also a weapon, and she would learn to use it. From the moment she set foot on Olympus, Aphrodite did not go unnoticed. Her brilliance was like the sun after a storm, an irresistible call to all who saw her. Every detail about her, The golden hair that fell like strands of silk, the lips that seemed to have been shaped by desire itself, made her an impossible vision to ignore. But her beauty went beyond appearance. She exuded a magnetism that made it impossible to look away. Wherever she went, both gods and mortals surrendered to the simple desire to have her near, even without knowing why. Hera, Athena, Artemis, even the most powerful goddesses resented that Aphrodite's presence made the gazes of men and gods waver. She was vain, of course. How could she not be? Every day she looked at her reflection in the crystal-clear waters and smiled, aware of the power she carried. She loved adorning herself with the rarest jewels, dressing in fabrics that slid over her skin like the sea breeze. But more than that, Aphrodite loved being desired, and Olympus, in turn, was in turmoil because of her. Zeus, Poseidon, Hermes, Apollo, all of them at some point tried to win her over. The competition for her attention was constant, and with it, rivalries were formed, intrigues arose, and even alliances were broken. There was something in her essence that awakened overwhelming passions, the kind of feeling that blinded reason and made the gods do crazy things. But this freedom to enchant whomever she wanted and to love without ties was coming to an end. Olympus was not a place where chaos went unnoticed, and soon a decision would be made to contain the power Aphrodite represented. Olympus was a place of order, governed by divine laws and the desire for balance among the gods. But Aphrodite, with her beauty and irresistible magnetism, was breaking this harmony. Wherever she went, she left a trail of hearts crazed, forbidden passions, and misunderstandings that shook even the oldest bonds. The gods became rivals for her attention, and those who didn't win her over were consumed by jealousy. Small disagreements turned into intense disputes. Hera, queen of Olympus and guardian of stability, watched it all with growing irritation. As Zeus's wife, she was already dealing with constant betrayals and chaos caused by unchecked passions. But Aphrodite took it to another level. The goddess of love did not respect hierarchies or alliances. Her power was so great that it made even the most rational give in to uncontrollable impulses. If something wasn't done, Olympus would become a battlefield of unrequited loves and empty promises. So Hera made a decision. If Aphrodite couldn't be controlled by words or warnings, she would be imprisoned by an unbreakable bond, marriage. But it couldn't be just anyone. Her husband had to be someone who didn't represent a threat, someone who wouldn't awaken in her a burning passion, and who could, at the same time, keep her under control. And so Hephaestus was chosen, the god of the forge, with his face marked by fire and his hands hardened by work, was the opposite of everything Aphrodite desired. Unlike the warriors and adventurers she usually enchanted, Hephaestus was quiet, dedicated to his craft, and indifferent to power struggles. He was not a conqueror. He didn't have the imposing presence of Ares or the beauty of Apollo. He was an artisan, someone who built wonders, but who would never seduce a goddess like Aphrodite, and for Hera, that was perfect. The decision was announced. Aphrodite, the goddess of desire, would be married to Hephaestus, the god of the forge. No choice could seem more cruel to someone who lived for passion and freedom, but Olympus was not a place for choices. It was a place of imposed destinies, and for the first time, Aphrodite felt the weight of a destiny she couldn't control. The announcement of the marriage spread through Olympus like wildfire. The gods whispered among themselves, incredulous at the decision. How could the goddess of love, the most beautiful of the immortals, be given to Hephaestus, the lame god, covered in soot and always immersed in his work at the forge? Many laughed, others were outraged, but no one dared to question Hera's will. Aphrodite, however, felt humiliated. She, who could bend any heart to her will, was now being forced to unite with someone she would never choose. It didn't matter that Hephaestus was a genius craftsman, a god respected for his inventions and intelligence. To her, the marriage was a golden cage, cold and lifeless. The ceremony took place on Mount Olympus, surrounded by golden clouds and divine chants. The gods were celebrating, feasting and toasting to the union, but Aphrodite felt out of place, almost absent. She wore a shimmering silk cloak, adorned with precious stones and woven gold threads, a gift from Hephaestus, who had crafted every detail with his own hands. But to her, none of it mattered. Her gaze didn't sparkle with joy, and her mouth didn't form any true smiles. Hephaestus, in turn, looked at his new wife with a mixture of pride and hesitation. He knew he wasn't the husband she wanted, that his touch would never make her heart race, but still, he tried to offer her the best of himself. He built Aphrodite a magnificent palace, filled with golden columns, hanging gardens, and fountains that poured nectar instead of water. He created enchanted jewels that shone brighter than the stars and adornments that made any mortal look like a deity. He wanted to win her over, even though he knew that love could not be forged like his weapons and armor. But Aphrodite didn't want gold or lavish mansions. Her heart longed for something else, something Hephaestus could never provide. Passion, the sweetness and dedication of her husband didn't stir in her the burning desire that made her blood boil. And while Hephaestus spent hours in his forge, hammering metals and crafting wonders for the gods, Aphrodite wandered through Olympus, bored, feeling as though her essence was being slowly erased. She might have been bound by a marriage, but no. One could chain her desire, and deep down in her restless soul, Aphrodite knew this wouldn't end here. Hephaestus was never a god like the others. Unlike the majestic and glorious inhabitants of Olympus, his life had started marked by contempt and rejection. From birth, Hera, his own mother, saw him as unworthy of her lineage. Unlike the other gods, who were beautiful and perfect, Hephaestus was born with a deformity in his leg, an unforgivable flaw for the vain queen of the gods. Hera didn't hesitate. Without remorse, she cast her son from the heights of Olympus, as if he were a mistake to be erased. Hephaestus fell from the sky, plummeting through the clouds in freefall until he crashed into the violent waters of the ocean. His fragile body was swallowed by the waves and carried to the reefs where, broken and wounded, he was rescued by Thetis and Eurynome, two sea goddesses who took him in and raised him far from the scorn of Olympus. While the other gods grew up surrounded by luxury and adoration, Hephaestus learned to survive in solitude. In a cave hidden beneath the ocean's depths, he found refuge among forges of fire and metal. Over time, his suffering turned into skill, and his hands, once weak, became the most skilled of all creation. With every strike of the hammer, he shaped not only metal, but also his own strength, proving that his worth did not depend on the approval of the other gods. Years later, upon discovering the truth about his origin, Hephaestus devised a revenge against Hera. He forged a golden throne, incredibly beautiful and adorned with precious stones, and sent it as a gift to the mother who had rejected him. But the throne was a trap. As soon as Hera sat down, she became trapped, unable to rise. No god could free her, and only Hephaestus had the power to undo his own creation. Thus, he returned to Olympus, not as a rejected son, but as a feared and respected god. Only after many pleas and the intervention of Dionysus, who intoxicated him to soften his heart, did Hephaestus agree to release Hera, but not without first demanding something in return. He wanted a place among the gods, and he got it. Now Hephaestus had power, wealth, and respect. But fate, as always, would offer him one last gift: a marriage to the most beautiful woman in Olympus. For any other god, marrying Aphrodite would have been a dream. But Hephaestus knew that to her, He would never be enough. And deep down, no matter how hard he tried to deny it, he knew one day he would pay the price for this union. The first days after the ceremony were silent. While Hephaestus dedicated himself to his forges, shaping weapons and wonders for the gods, Aphrodite wandered through the golden palace, feeling like a prisoner amid the luxury. He was a respectful husband, never imposing his presence, never demanding anything from her. But to Aphrodite, this absence only made things worse. Hephaestus spent entire days immersed in the heat of the flames, hammering metals and sculpting jewels that no one could ever replicate. He created indestructible armor, magnificent thrones, and enchanted chains, but never stopped to look his wife in the eyes. Aphrodite wanted to be desired. It didn't matter how many gold necklaces he gave her, how many ruby and sapphire-encrusted adornments he put at her disposal. None of that could replace what she truly lacked: passion. Whispers about their marriage ran wild in the halls of Olympus. The gods knew that this union was a mistake. They saw how Aphrodite wandered, bored, how she avoided talking about her husband, how her vibrant essence seemed to fade little by little. Meanwhile, Hephaestus followed his methodical routine, pretending not to notice what everyone already knew. The banquets in Olympus became a torment for Aphrodite. She saw Hera and Zeus exchanging defiant glances, Poseidon surrounded by nymphs, Apollo telling stories of his conquests. Everyone around her lived in love, passion, and conflict. But she, the very goddess of love, was condemned to a cold and lonely marriage. Her heart burned for something Hephaestus could never give her, and it was in this void that temptation began to grow. She could feel the eyes of other gods on her. She knew that her beauty still stirred desire. She knew that if she wanted, she could break those invisible chains that bound her to that lifeless marriage. And one gaze in particular began to haunt her. Ares, the god of war, impulsive, fiery, and unpredictable, watched her from afar with a half-smile that promised everything she had been denied. And it was there, in that instant, that Aphrodite realized her heart would never belong to the god of forges. He might be a great craftsman, a creator of wonders, but passion, that was something he could never forge. Aphrodite wasn't sure what attracted her to Ares. Maybe it was the way he carried the energy of battle, or the way his presence seemed to command everyone's attention on Olympus. Ares wasn't like the other gods. He didn't care about appearances or the game of empty words. He was pure intensity, a reflection of war, passion, and conflict. It all started on an ordinary day, but anyone who had ever lived on Olympus knew that nothing was ever truly ordinary. Aphrodite was in a meeting in the main hall where all the gods and goddesses were discussing matters of the universe. She, as always, was the center of attention. Her radiant beauty illuminated the room and all eyes turned toward her. But that day, she felt an increasing emptiness. The words of the other gods began to sound distant, as though she were hearing through a veil of mist. Her eyes, searching for something to fill her, turned to the door, and there he was, Ares, the god of war, had just arrived, as imposing as ever, his armor gleaming in the soft light of the sun filtering through the windows. His eyes, black and intense, seemed to scan everyone around him, but the moment he looked at Aphrodite, something changed. It wasn't just a look, it was a silent exchange, filled with something more, something deep, something that made Aphrodite's heart beat faster, something she couldn't name. Ares didn't smile, nor did he approach immediately. But his presence dominated the room. Those battles he fought, the endless wars, seemed small compared to the field of forces he was now creating around Aphrodite. She didn't know if it was the smell of the battlefield on his skin, or the way his gaze silently challenged her, but a wave of desire washed over her. She knew there was something about Ares that attracted her irresistibly, something that Hephaestus, with all his skill and devotion, could never awaken in her. It was raw power, a pulsing energy, a virility that seemed to make Olympus itself tremble. And Aphrodite, though she tried to ignore it, found herself drawn to that power. For a moment, all the other gods vanished, and only Ares and Aphrodite were present in that hall. They exchanged a glance filled with unspoken promises. Aphrodite knew that this moment was no longer just attraction. It was a calling, a force beyond reason or what her marriage of convenience with Hephaestus could offer her. And then the inevitable began to form in her mind. Ares. She needed him. The moment happened on a warm night. Olympus bathed in stars, with the sounds of festivities echoing in the distance. Aphrodite was restless, her heart beating loudly in her chest. She didn't know exactly how or why, but when her eyes met Ares's, that night, a wave of desire swept through her body. He was in the hall, surrounded by other gods, but something in the way he looked at her made her feel as if they were the only two people in the world. Ares didn't need to say a word. His eyes burned with a fire that Aphrodite knew well, the same fire that blazed inside her. It was an intense, primal attraction, something that could not be denied. When he approached, time seemed to slow down, the sounds of laughter and conversations around them distorting until they disappeared. Without a single word, Ares led her to the hidden gardens of Olympus. The flowering bushes and tall trees served as cover, and the atmosphere felt charged with the tension of the moment. There, under the veil of night, there were no rules, no marriage, no gods watching. Aphrodite, feeling desire in every touch, gave herself to the passion without hesitation. The kiss that followed was like an explosion, something she had never experienced before. Ares took her relentlessly, the force and urgency of his movements revealing a desire she had never known in her marriage to Hephaestus. When Aphrodite's body met Ares's, everything she had lost in her loveless marriage was reclaimed there in that forbidden night. There was no space for doubt, only the certainty that they were sharing something uncontrollable, something that transcended the boundaries of Olympus. The world around them disappeared as they became immersed in one another. What had begun as a brief exchange of glances turned into a fiery and secret union. By the end of the night, Aphrodite knew she could not go back, not anymore. Ares had ignited a flame in her that would never be extinguished. But she also knew that by following this path, she was entering a dangerous game, where passion and betrayal walked hand in hand. And Olympus, as always, would not be lenient with her choices. The encounters between Aphrodite and Ares became frequent. At first, they met secretly at night when Olympus quieted down, but soon the desire they shared became impossible to hide. Every touch between them was a silent promise, a flame that could never be put out. With Ares, Aphrodite felt more alive than ever. It was as if he released something inside her that she hadn't known was trapped. Their passion was not limited to the skin. It invaded their souls, consuming them in an uncontrollable fire. Ares was everything she desired, a spirit as strong and invincible as the winds of war. With him, Aphrodite was not just the goddess of beauty. She became part of something larger, something visceral. Each meeting grew more intense, more urgent. Ares had a way of making her feel an overwhelming sense of power and vulnerability at the same time. He didn't treat Aphrodite like a distant goddess, but like a woman he desired with every fiber of his being. The heat between them grew more intense, as if nothing in the world could pull them apart. In every secret meeting, the tension between them was palpable. With every kiss, every touch, Aphrodite felt herself more drawn to him, and at the same time more trapped by the strength of this passion. It was something she couldn't control, a whirlwind of emotions that threatened to destroy her, yet enchanted her at the same time. Ares, with his fierce strength, filled her in a way Hephaestus never could. While Olympus continued its routine, the passion between Aphrodite and Ares intensified, and like a fire that doesn't easily burn out, it became harder and harder to hide. Their love was not peaceful. It was tumultuous, like a battlefield where two hearts clashed, yet at the same time completed each other. Aphrodite felt more alive in ways she had never imagined. But she also knew that this fiery union came with risks. The gods were relentless watchers, and the line between desire and destruction had never been so thin. Yet nothing could extinguish the desire that burned between her and Ares. When they were together, everything else disappeared. Olympus, Hephaestus, even time itself. They became lovers not just out of desire, but out of necessity. And Aphrodite, with her fickle heart and intense passions, knew her life would never be the same. Aphrodite, with her eyes burning with desire and her soul consumed by a passion she could no longer ignore, began to notice changes within herself. What had begun as a fiery escape, a surrender without limits, was now transforming into something she hadn't expected, a pregnancy. Aphrodite's body, always in harmony with the forces of love, was about to create a new life, a new being that would carry the very essence of her passion with Ares. When news of her pregnancy reached Olympus, many gods were surprised, but no one dared to question it. Aphrodite's beauty was even more radiant, but her smile now hid something more. She knew what it meant. The child she carried would be more than just a symbol of her union with Ares. He would be the very god of love, the being capable of launching arrows of desire that would pierce the hearts of all, making them yield to the charms of passion. Hephaestus, still unaware of the true father of the child, was the first to embrace the baby with a generosity that bordered on naivety. He, who had been scorned by his wife, found himself enveloped in a strange sense of hope and responsibility. Though his heart was broken, he cared for the child, who would never be his without question, simply accepting life in the purest and quietest way. But Aphrodite knew the weight she carried. As she prepared for the birth of Eros, the little god of love, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that secret meeting with Ares. The passion that had consumed her had given birth not only to a child, but to a new era where love and pain walked hand in hand. Eros would grow to be a powerful being, master of the arrows that would strike even the strongest hearts, making even the most imposing gods succumb to the power of love. But for now, he was just a baby, with curious eyes and a mischievous smile. Aphrodite looked at him with a mixture of tenderness and sorrow, knowing that the child who carried within him the pure essence of desire would forever change the fate of the gods and Olympus itself. However, there was something more in Aphrodite's eyes, something still unresolved. As she cared for Eros, she knew that the passion between her and Ares would never be fully controlled. Their fate was intertwined, but just like the love they shared, it would be unstable and unpredictable. The future, as always, was wrapped in mystery. Helios, the god of the sun, had always been attentive to everything that happened in Olympus, as his position made him a witness to all the shadows and lights of the great mountain. He knew when the sun rose and set, watched the gods and their actions from afar, illuminating everything with his golden light. But unlike many gods, Helios was not driven by vanity or a desire to control the actions of others. His role was to observe, record, and, when necessary, report. And that's exactly what happened. One morning, as he ascended the skies in his golden chariot, driven by his 4 fiery horses, he noticed something that made him stop for a moment. In the distance, on the vast land of Olympus, the soft glow of dawn illuminated the figures of Aphrodite and Ares. They were together, in an isolated corner, sharing an intimacy so strong it seemed to defy the laws of the universe itself. Helios's son became a silent, direct observer. He didn't just watch. Helios was known for his integrity and honor. Upon seeing the lovers, he knew something had to be done. The betrayal was happening right before everyone's eyes, but not to anyone else. Aphrodite and Ares were acting as though the world around them didn't exist, surrendering to their passion without caring about the consequences. With a resigned sigh, Helios decided it was his duty to reveal the truth. He couldn't allow such a transgression to remain hidden. With his deep, unwavering voice, the sun god announced to the other gods the vision he had seen. The lovers can no longer hide what they've done. The sun saw what Olympus did not, he proclaimed, his light burning the hearts of all who heard him. The news spread like wildfire among the gods. It was a betrayal that could not be ignored, especially in a pantheon where honor and respect were paramount. The scandal was about to explode. Helios, with his stern gaze, had finally done what needed to be done, and the truth was now at the mercy of all. Aphrodite, upon learning that her affair with Ares had been exposed, felt a mix of emotions. There was shame, but also a sense of inevitability. She knew that somehow fate had brought her to this moment. However, how the other gods would react to the betrayal was something she couldn't predict. Olympus was now in a frenzy of conversations, curious glances, and silent condemnations. The pieces were in motion. Aphrodite and Ares had taken the first step on a path that would change the course of their destinies, and those of all who inhabited the realm of the gods. When Hephaestus learned of the betrayal, there were no explosive bursts of fury, no shouts or grand gestures. He was a quiet god, his heart marked by a life of rejection and solitude. But when he heard Helios's revelation, his chest tightened in a way he didn't know he could feel. It was a cold, deep pain, like the metal he tirelessly worked on in his forge. He knew pain was his constant companion, but this wound, the betrayal of his wife with Ares, was something he never expected. Hephaestus withdrew to his solitary corner of Olympus. There, where he forged his incredible creations, his thoughts began to forge something too. The pain turned into cunning, the resentment into a brilliant idea. He wouldn't be like the other gods and seek revenge with brute force or bitter words. No, Hephaestus wasn't like that. He was a craftsman, and he knew the best way to deal with this was to create something more complex, more elaborate. A trap that would expose the betrayal in such a humiliating way that the gods themselves couldn't ignore it. As Olympus carried on, Hephaestus immersed himself in his work. His hands were busy with something more than the hot metal he shaped for his weapons. He was shaping revenge, and this revenge would come in the form of an invisible net, a net that would be as delicate as it was deadly. He didn't just want to capture the lovers physically. He wanted to expose them publicly, so all the gods could see what they had done and suffer the consequences. Over the following days, Hephaestus worked in silence, his mind occupied with his plan. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that betrayal was a poison that could spread throughout Olympus. And just like the pain he felt, this betrayal had to be revealed in an unrelenting and inescapable way. Finally, after many nights of solitary work, Hephaestus was ready. The net was finished, a masterpiece of ingenuity invisible to the human eye, but as strong as any iron chain. He knew that when the lovers fell into it, there would be no escape. Not even Aphrodite, with her radiant beauty, nor Ares, with his unmatched strength, would be able to escape this trap. And when it happened, all of Olympus would be forced to watch. But Hephaestus wasn't just driven by anger. Above all, he wanted Aphrodite's pride to be shaken. He wanted her to see that no matter how much she was the goddess of love, love wouldn't always protect her from the mistakes she made. With the net ready and his revenge laid out, Hephaestus waited for the perfect moment. He knew that eventually Aphrodite and Ares would meet again, and then he would cast the invisible net, bringing with it all the humiliation he had planned. Olympus was in a silent frenzy. The gods and goddesses, with their watchful eyes, observed the movements in the realm, still touched by the revelation of Aphrodite and Ares's betrayal. The tension in the air was palpable, and Hephaestus, with his silent cunning, waited for the right moment to reveal his revenge. He knew that time was his greatest ally. Everything had to be done in the most subtle way, without giving any hint that he was behind it all. When the opportunity arose, he didn't hesitate. Aphrodite and Ares, immersed in their own worlds of desire and passion, barely noticed that their actions were being observed. Hephaestus's plan was about to be set in motion. He knew that, as impulsive lovers, they would meet again in secret, and when that happened, it would be the last time they experienced that freedom. Hephaestus, with a skill only he possessed, cast his invisible net over the conjugal bed. The net was a masterpiece of his talent as a blacksmith, made from the finest threads, forged from the rarest metal. It was undetectable to the eyes of any mortal or god. Perfection was in every detail. When the trap closed, even the most powerful gods would be unable to escape. The god blacksmith then hid, waiting patiently for the lovers' arrival. Olympus continued to turn, but in that moment, all the forces were directed to one point, the bed where Aphrodite and Ares would once again surrender to their passion. As time passed, Hephaestus felt a controlled calm. He knew that revenge wouldn't just be a physical punishment, but a public exposure of what the gods considered an unforgivable sin. When Aphrodite and Ares gave in to their passion once more, they would be unknowingly walking straight into their downfall. Finally, the night came. Aphrodite, with her irresistible charm, and Ares, with his warrior's body marked by battle, found themselves in the bed that had been destined for something much more sacred. They gave in to desire, unaware that they were about to be caught. The moment their bodies touched the bed, the invisible net activated. Threads of metal intertwined around them, binding them with an unbreakable force. Aphrodite, with her unmistakable grace and beauty, was surprised, trying to get up, but the net held her there, motionless. Ares, the god of war, with all his strength, couldn't escape either. They were both trapped, physically, emotionally, and in a way neither of them could have imagined. Hephaestus's revenge was now complete. The perfect trap had been successful, and nothing could stop the outcome he had planned. When the invisible net closed around Aphrodite and Ares, Olympus became a silent stage, vibrating with the tension of the moment. Hephaestus, with an impassive look and a heart that had finally found some kind of resolution, was now just waiting. The trap was in action, and what happened next would change the destiny of all those involved. Aphrodite and Ares, still immersed in the pleasure of the moment, didn't immediately realize that something was wrong. They were lost in each other, passion blinding any sense of alertness. But as the net tightened around them, a strange sensation began to take hold, an impossible feeling. Their movements became more difficult, and Ares's body, usually invincible, began to give way, as though some invisible power was restricting his movements. Aphrodite, who had confidently given herself in the past, felt the pressure around her. She tried to move, but the net wrapped around her with a force that denied any resistance. It was as if destiny was holding her with invisible hands, trapping her in the moment of her greatest weakness. The goddess of love, so used to ruling over hearts and desires, now found herself in a completely powerless situation. Ares, for his part, couldn't believe what was happening. The god of war, the mighty Ares, who had faced epic battles and emerged victorious, was now trapped by something he couldn't see or understand. What seemed like a simple pleasure bed had turned into an inescapable prison. When they were completely immobilized, the glow of the net began to reflect the soft light of the moon, and Hephaestus made his entrance. He appeared at the door with a cold but unperturbed look, as if nothing extraordinary was happening. His plan was unfolding perfectly. Aphrodite, her face marked by surprise and shame, looked up at him. Her eyes gleamed with a mixture of confusion and humiliation. She knew he was behind all of this, that he, the husband she had despised, was watching their every move. Ares, though imposing, couldn't deny that he was equally trapped. His defiant words died in his throat as he realized nothing could free them. "You thought you could escape the consequences of your actions, didn't you?" Hephaestus said, his voice firm yet calm. There was no anger in his words, only a silent, painful indifference. "Now everyone on Olympus will see what you've done." Through his net he could feel the power of his own revenge. Hephaestus wasn't in a hurry to free them. He wasn't interested in simply easing the situation. He wanted every second of humiliation to be absorbed by Aphrodite and Ares. He wanted the weight of shame to fall on them inescapably, and so he left them there, exposed and immobilized, as he began to summon the gods of Olympus for the spectacle he had prepared. The silence in Olympus was broken by a growing murmur as the gods began to gather in the room where Aphrodite and Ares were immobilized. Hephaestus, with a calculating gaze and cold composure, wasted no time. He called the gods to witness what had transpired so they could all see with their own eyes the betrayal of the lovers. Aphrodite, the goddess who once ruled hearts and desires, was now at the mercy of the laughter and gazes of her immortal peers. She, who had always had the power to enchant with her smile and beauty, was now fallen, vulnerable, before those who had admired and feared her. Her eyes, shining with a mixture of rage and shame, met Ares. He, equally trapped, remained silent, his face marked by a mixture of disbelief and shame. The god of war, once feared and respected, now seemed small, powerless. The gods of Olympus began to arrive one by one. Zeus, with his imposing gaze, entered the room, and his presence rang like thunder. Seeing them there, exposed, he raised an eyebrow but remained silent, observing the scene with the kind of authority only a god of gods could wield. Hera, on the other hand, couldn't hide the satisfied smile that formed on her lips. It was as if she, the betrayed wife, felt relief seeing her rival finally get what she deserved. "Look at that," Hera said, her voice dripping with venom. The goddess of love finally tastes the bitter flavor of her own betrayal. Other gods, like Athena, with her piercing gaze, stayed silent. But it was clear that everyone was watching with an interest that mixed compassion with the excitement of a grand spectacle. Even Poseidon, the lord of the seas, who often seemed distant from Olympus's matters, made a point to approach and observe the scene. However, he couldn't hide the discomfort he felt seeing Aphrodite and Ares humiliated. Laughter began to spread slowly, like waves in a stormy sea. Hermes, the messenger god, couldn't help but make a joke. "Who would have thought," he said with a mischievous grin, "Ares and Aphrodite, the most powerful lovers of Olympus, are now prisoners of an invisible net." But not everyone shared the humor. Some gods felt the tension of the situation, while others, like Apollo, stepped back a bit, perhaps not wanting to get involved in such a cruel exposure. Hephaestus, however, was unshaken. He was exacting his revenge in the way he deemed necessary. Through the gazes of everyone present, he knew that the humiliation of Aphrodite and Ares was being absorbed by Olympus. The pain they were feeling wasn't just that of their imprisoned bodies, but the loss of their position, their power, and above all, their dignity. The betrayed husband looked at Aphrodite with a gaze that mixed compassion with bitter satisfaction. Now everyone knows what really happens when desire and pride become stronger than loyalty, he said, his voice calm but laden with deep pain. You are no longer gods of love or war. Now you are just two prisoners in the web that weaves fate. As the gods of Olympus looked on, Aphrodite and Ares remained silent, accepting their humiliation as it was imposed upon them. There were no words to change what was happening, nothing that could erase the weight of the public shame that would now mark their existence forever. The room was filled with the scent of tension. Olympus had never witnessed a scene like this, where the gods themselves were at the mercy of shame. Each of the present gods reacted in a unique way, reflecting their personalities, priorities, and loyalties. The mockery of some contrasted with the attempts to console by others, and the heavy silence of many seemed to amplify the impact of that historic moment. Zeus, the king of the gods, watched it all with calculated impartiality. His gaze seemed to weigh every reaction, every movement of the other gods, but he maintained a distant posture. Despite his apparent indifference, his presence commanded respect. However, no one knew for sure what he was thinking. For Zeus, it was all about power, and what was happening between Aphrodite, Ares, and Hephaestus seemed like just another of Olympus's endless schemes, which he preferred to observe before intervening. Hera, on the other hand, couldn't hide the pleasure she felt at the humiliation of the lovers. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For so long, she had been the betrayed wife, and now it was her turn to see Aphrodite's contempt exposed. Serves her right, she muttered through gritted teeth, a smile overflowing with satisfaction. But in her heart, she knew that this triumph was momentary. Gods may be ruthless, but the love between divinities never completely fades. She was only waiting to see what would come next. Meanwhile, Poseidon seemed disturbed. Though his strength and authority in Olympus were unquestionable, he couldn't bear to see Aphrodite and Ares humiliated so publicly. He knew what it was like to suffer from unrequited love, and the scene before him made him reflect on his own losses and frustrations. "We should show them more respect," he said in a low voice, trying to speak in defense of the lovers, but his words were drowned out by the growing chatter around him. His attempt to intercede was ignored by many, but still, he didn't move away. Athena, usually the voice of reason and wisdom, remained silent, watching with attentive eyes. She knew that desire often led the gods astray, but she also understood that Hephaestus's revenge, though just in his eyes, was cruel. She couldn't help but feel that the real lesson in this situation wasn't the mockery, but the consequences of impetuous choices. She didn't join in the laughter, but neither did she show explicit support for any side. Her gaze was one of calm analysis, but filled with silent disapproval. Apollo, always seeking beauty in things, seemed uncomfortable. He, who had always fed on harmony, love, and art, could find no humor in seeing his fellow gods humiliated publicly. The beauty of Aphrodite and the strength of Ares had been his muses in moments of creation and inspiration, and seeing them fallen to the same level as mortals disturbed him deeply. His expression showed an inner conflict, a struggle between what was right and what was indulgent. But in the end, he stepped back, unable to find solace in the laughter that echoed through the room. Hermes, the messenger god, couldn't resist. His mischievous smile never faded, and he allowed himself to laugh at the situation. "Well, it seems even the gods of love and war have their moments of weakness," he said, mocking the gravity of the situation. For Hermes, life was a game, a big amusement. He didn't view the betrayal of Aphrodite and Ares with the same seriousness as the other gods. To him, it was just a fun divine plot. His irreverent attitude irritated some, but it also lightened the mood, albeit in a disconcerting way. but the most observant gaze was on Hephaestus. He watched everyone with unsettling calm. There was no euphoria in his behavior, nor any signs of malice. He seemed completely resolute, as though he was finally completing a masterpiece. While other gods laughed or fidgeted, Hephaestus was satisfied. His revenge was being carried out as he had imagined, and nothing could change that. He had gotten what he wanted: the public exposure of his pain, the betrayal of Aphrodite and Ares. The balance was restored in his own way. Olympus was divided. While most of the gods enjoyed the scene, others, like Poseidon and Apollo, felt a quiet pain. But in the end, what was happening there was a reflection of the eternal dance of power, love, and revenge among the immortals. The humiliation of Aphrodite and Ares might have been more of a lesson than a punishment. But one thing was certain: nothing in Olympus would ever be the same after that day. The laughter and whispers of the gods died down as Hephaestus, with an almost icy calm, approached the lovers trapped in the magical net. Aphrodite and Ares were tangled, visibly uncomfortable, their faces marked by shame and frustration. They had been caught in their betrayal, not only by the gods, but by the very net that immobilized them, forcing them to face the weight of public humiliation. For a moment, Olympus seemed suspended, as if time itself had stopped. The tension in the air was palpable. Hephaestus's gaze was cold, but when his voice was heard, it showed no anger, only deep disgust. "Here are the two gods who thought they could escape Olympus's justice," he said, with a reproachful tone that echoed through every corner of the room. "Now you will be freed, but remember, shame is the one thing that can never be erased." With firm hands, Hephaestus undid the invisible net that bound them. Aphrodite and Ares were granted their freedom, but it felt bitter, a freedom that didn't come without its scars. As the two lovers stood up, avoiding eye contact with the other gods, it was clear that nothing would ever be the same. The shame they had experienced could not be easily forgotten, and the weight of the consequences would follow them for a long time. Aphrodite in particular seemed devastated. Her exuberant nature, which had always made her radiate confidence, was now broken. She looked at Hephaestus, a mix of regret and anger in her eyes, but also a silent understanding. She had lost something far more valuable than she realized. Her marriage to Hephaestus, which had initially seemed like a passionless prison, now represented the loss of something bigger: respect, trust, and most of all, her own identity as the goddess of love. The scandal would undoubtedly mark her history indelibly. Ares, for his part, seemed more restrained, but the look in his eyes reflected his own humiliation. He, who had always been the embodiment of strength and courage, was now weakened by the public exposure of his mistake. He looked at the gods, as if searching for some sign of sympathy or relief, but found only a sea of judgment. His passion for Aphrodite, though uncontrollable, had cost him more than he could have imagined. He, the god of war, who had always triumphed in battles, was now defeated in a field he never thought could be his, the field of emotion and vulnerability. Hephaestus, without exchanging more words with the lovers, turned his back and withdrew. His heart was no longer seeking revenge or satisfaction. He had gained what he wanted, but something in his expression suggested that inside, he still felt the pain of the betrayal. It was not just about justice, but about a love that would never be returned the way he wanted. The gods, in turn, began to disperse, some still murmuring to each other, others more silent, as if reflecting on what they had just witnessed. The humiliation of Aphrodite and Ares had been a spectacle, but there was no real joy in it. The lesson, though clear, left a bitter taste in many immortal hearts. Even in Olympus, choices and mistakes had profound consequences. Meanwhile, Aphrodite and Ares distanced themselves from each other in uncomfortable silence. They knew the passion that had brought them together could never be erased. But they also knew that their relationship had changed forever. Aphrodite, no matter how much she desired to be with Ares, knew she needed to step back for a while. She needed to reflect on her actions, to understand the depth of the consequences now pressing on her. The love, which once seemed unshakable, now felt fragile and full of cracks. Ares, on the other hand, with his warrior soul, didn't want this moment of weakness to define his existence. He, who had always prided himself on his strength, wanted to move on, but could not deny the weight of the shame he felt. He knew he would have to face, sooner or later, the emptiness that the betrayal had left between them. In the end, Olympus would never be the same. That public humiliation was an eternal reminder that even powerful gods were not immune to human and divine frailties. The scars of that betrayal would never disappear, and the story of Aphrodite, Ares, and Hephaestus would remain etched in the memory of Olympus as a painful but essential lesson about the complexities of love, betrayal, and honor. Olympus seemed still, as if in a state of suspension, waiting for the next move of its gods. Aphrodite, immersed in her shame, wandered through the celestial garden, her steps light but heavy with thought. The brilliance she once exuded now seemed dimmed, as if the light of love she represented was fading before a sea of uncertainties. Her heart, which had always been driven by the relentless pursuit of desire, now found itself in a vortex of confusion and regret. It was in this solitude that she had an unexpected encounter with Hera, the queen of Olympus, observing with interest. The transformation of the goddess of love knew that Aphrodite would need someone who understood the weight of being rejected. Despite Aphrodite's flaws, Hera knew that the pain of betrayal was something any woman, divine or mortal, could understand. With a serene gaze, she approached Aphrodite and, with soft words, spoke. "Aphrodite, what is done. There is no turning back. The marriage that Hera forged for you with Hephaestus, though it was not your desire, was a prison for a spirit like yours. Now, by freeing yourself from this union, you will rediscover who you truly are." Aphrodite, with a heavy heart and tear-filled eyes, looked at the goddess, who in turn maintained a firm and unchanging gaze. "But what about Hephaestus?" Aphrodite murmured, guilt echoing in her words. "What do I do with him, with what he's been through?" Hera sighed. "Hephaestus has always been strong, and his pain will be his to bear. Don't try to carry the burden of what cannot be repaired. What matters now is moving forward, learning from your mistakes, and seeking what will truly fill your being." With these words, Aphrodite understood that her fate was in her own hands. Her marriage to Hephaestus, which had never been born of her love, now seemed a distant shadow. She knew the pain he felt was real and deep, but she also knew she couldn't continue in a union that had already been destroyed by the wounds of betrayal. The goddess of love needed to reclaim her freedom, even if that meant going separate ways from Hephaestus. Meanwhile, Hephaestus, isolated in his workshop away from the rest of Olympus, reflected on what had just happened. His heart, once closed off to love, now felt the weight of the pain he had ignored for so long. When he learned of the betrayal, he didn't seek revenge, but the end of his marriage to Aphrodite left him in a state of deep sadness. He knew that, at some point, he would need to let go of what remained of this union. But at the same time, the feeling of failure ran through his veins. "I didn't want it to be this way," he murmured to himself as his forge heated the iron for another piece of work. But it seems the true pain isn't the betrayal itself. It's the pain of not being loved the way you desire. The marriage between Aphrodite and Hephaestus ended without much ceremony. There were no farewell celebrations, nor bitter words exchanged. Both knew that, even as gods, they didn't always have control over what happened in their hearts. Love for them had been a flame that could not be fed, no matter how much they wanted or tried. For Aphrodite, the end of this marriage wasn't a defeat, but a liberation. For the first time, she felt a wave of genuine freedom, a sense of power, coming from within. Hephaestus, though hurt, isolated himself for a while in his forge, where his mind focused on creating new works. His heart, though broken, still held the strength of a god of creation, capable of shaping his own fate. But, over time, the separation between Aphrodite and Hephaestus became another bitter chapter in the history of the Olympian gods. The goddess of love, finally free, began to follow her own path, but she knew that, like all immortals, she too carried in her heart the scars of what could not be erased. Thus, the marriage of Aphrodite and Hephaestus ended, but the impact of all that had happened would linger in the hearts of gods and mortals for a long time. What remained in history wasn't just the betrayal, but the lesson that not all marriages, not all loves, are meant to last. Sometimes it's necessary to let go so the soul can find its true purpose. After the public scandal, and with the definitive end of the marriage between Aphrodite and Hephaestus, the winds of Olympus were filled with murmurs and curiosity. The relationship between Aphrodite and Ares, which had already been intense and full of passion, began to suffer the consequences of public exposure. The humiliation both gods endured in front of all the other immortals left scars, and not even the strength of their desire could erase the shame that now followed them. Aphrodite, although still in love with Ares, needed time to reflect. The pressure of Olympus and the constant scrutiny of the other gods made her position unsustainable. She needed to find a way to deal with the chaos in her personal life without losing herself in the fire of the passion still burning in her heart. Furthermore, she knew that to heal the wounds she had caused, she should step back, give space for regret to turn into understanding. Ares, on the other hand, was used to living under the winds of war, but the weight of the scandal and the growing concern about the repercussions of their secret relationship began to affect even his combative spirit. Although his desire for Aphrodite was strong, he knew that the situation was becoming increasingly complicated. The god of war, who had always faced battles of blood and iron, now found himself in a much harder internal struggle, the embarrassment of shame and the discomfort of betrayal. "I need time, Ares," Aphrodite said in one of their secret meetings. Her voice was soft but firm. What happened between us wasn't just about desire, it was deeper, more complicated. But now, with everything that's happened, I don't know what's real. I need space to understand. Ares, who wasn't used to being rejected, felt a tightness in his chest. His eyes, usually full of determination, were now clouded by doubt. "I understand, Aphrodite," he replied, trying to hide how much this temporary separation was affecting him. "But know that my love for you will never diminish. I am a god of war. But this was something I never expected. I can't just forget what we shared." Aphrodite sighed deeply, her gaze empty as if searching for something she couldn't identify. "I know that, Ares, and you will always be a part of me. But we need time. The entire Olympus is watching, and what we want shouldn't be something for others to see, something for them to laugh at. I need time to rediscover who I am and what I really want." She slowly walked away, leaving Ares behind, still standing, staring into the emptiness. He knew that this separation didn't mean the end of everything, but he also knew that no matter how much he wanted to fight for her, the goddess of love needed time to heal. And somehow, he understood that she wasn't just seeking silence, but trying to regain her own balance, lost in a sea of betrayals and complexities. The temporary separation between Ares and Aphrodite lasted for weeks, though the fire of passion still burned silently between them. Aphrodite, immersed in her own reflections, began to distance herself from the other gods. She spent more time in the fields, among the flowers and gardens, where her spirit could, at least for a brief moment, find peace. But the pain she felt in her heart wasn't easy to overcome. For his part, Ares continued his incursions into battles and confrontations, but there was a lightness in his step. He was at peace, but it was an unsettling peace. Something was missing, and he knew that this emptiness could only be filled by Aphrodite. What they both didn't realize at that moment was that, by distancing themselves from each other, they were preparing for a journey of self-discovery. Although fate was still to come, Olympus had already begun to heal from the wounds caused by their forbidden love, while the love between Ares and Aphrodite, even temporarily separated, remained alive, ready to resurge when the time was right. Time passed, and though Aphrodite and Ares had drifted apart, the impact of their relationship continued to resonate throughout Olympus. The scandal of betrayal and public humiliation was not easily forgotten. The gods, who had once been blinded by admiration for Aphrodite or by Ares' strength, now saw these figures in a different light. Love, passion, and disloyalty had left an indelible mark on their lives. Hephaestus, the betrayed husband, though wounded inside, found a way to move forward. After all, he was the god of creation, and he had crafted wonders with his hands, from the hero's armor to the most ingenious traps. However, none of his brightest creations seemed capable of mending the damage in his heart. But he rose again. What seemed like an eternal loss transformed into an opportunity for renewal. Time helped him heal and reminded him that he also had his own worth, making him a unique and respected god. Aphrodite, for her part, learned a hard lesson about the limits of desire and vanity. Her heart, once always thirsty for attention and adoration, was now marked by the experience of betrayal. She began to understand that true love isn't just based on physical attraction or empty promises, but on mutual respect, trust, and most importantly, on realizing that the desire for something shouldn't be unconditional. She was still the goddess of beauty, seduction, and love, but now she also carried the weight of her choices. Ares, the god of war, had to deal with the pain of seeing his relationship with Aphrodite ruined, even though his love for her never diminished. But deep inside, he knew that, beyond fighting external enemies, he also needed to battle his own demons. He realized that no matter how strong and fearless he was in battle, there was something more important, the ability to keep his promises and loyalty, something he had failed to demonstrate when he gave in to unchecked desire. The Olympians thus observed the transformation of each one. Some gods, like Athena, knew that wisdom was more powerful than any other attribute and couldn't help but reflect on the fact that even the most powerful could fall into the traps of lust and impulsiveness. Hera, with her watchful and calculating gaze, observed all movements and began thinking about how to balance power in Olympus, realizing that love, when uncontrolled, could be as destructive as the fiercest of wars. Meanwhile, Aphrodite and Ares, temporarily separated, observed each other from a distance, and Olympus seemed to calm down. But the lessons that emerged from this tragedy weren't just for them. The other gods and goddesses began to understand that love, in its purest form, is not something that can be controlled without consequences. It is inconstant, fleeting, and often painful. But at the same time, it is a fire that, if nurtured with care and wisdom, can be eternal. The relationships that form or break among the gods of Olympus served as valuable lessons for mortals as well. The gods, with their flaws and passions, became mirrors of how human weaknesses can affect the choices that shape destiny. The stories of Aphrodite, Ares, and Hephaestus transcended Olympus, echoing through the centuries, leaving immortal lessons. Because, in the end, the true lesson this story brought was clear. Love, when not guided by wisdom and respect, has the power to destroy even the grandest of realms, whether in Olympus or on earth. Desire can be captivating and overwhelming, but the consequences of blindly following that path can be irreversible. Thus, although the story of Aphrodite and Ares was marked by betrayal and humiliation, it also became a point of reflection for all the gods and mortals. Love may be the greatest of blessings, but it is also one of the deepest responsibilities. The story of Aphrodite and Ares, marked by desire, betrayal, and severe consequences, is not unique in the vast panorama of mythology. It resonates with various other narratives, creating a web of parallels with myths that deal with themes of power, love, jealousy, and disappointments. These stories often reflect the complexities of human nature, where desire can be both a force of creation and destruction. In Olympus, for example, Hera herself had experienced the pain of betrayal, but in a distinct context. As Zeus's wife, she was intimately familiar with the power struggles and dilemmas of marriage. Hera, often described as the goddess of fidelity and marriage protection, suffered from her husband's infidelities. Hera's rage became immense, and her vengeances were feared by all. Though her reactions to Zeus's adultery were different from Hephaestus's, the pain of being betrayed and the attempt to regain control over her life and relationships were feelings that directly connected her to Aphrodite. Both goddesses, though with different degrees of power, suffered because of the failures in their marriages and dealt with the consequences of fragile relationships. But Aphrodite's similarities are not limited to Hera. Zeus himself, as powerful as he was, also found himself involved in multiple cases of betrayal and desire. However, unlike Aphrodite, Zeus seemed to be bolder and even more impunitive in his infidelities, which generated even greater tension among the other divine figures. The difference here is that while Aphrodite suffers public humiliation and is forced to reflect on her behavior, Zeus rarely faced real consequences for his actions. This contrast between the destinies of the two gods draws attention to a recurring theme: how power, whether male or female, is treated unequally, especially concerning fidelity and desire. Additionally, in Roman mythology, there are stories of other figures who also lived through the pain of betrayal, like Juno and Jupiter. Juno, goddess of family and fertility, experienced the same betrayal from Jupiter, Zeus in Greek mythology, as he gave himself to other loves. Like Hera, Juno used her anger to seek vengeance and did everything in her power to make Zeus suffer. However, even in this case, the betrayed woman was more judged, more held accountable, while the man, with his power, passed through the consequences more easily. Mythological stories always seem to repeat in different forms. Aphrodite, despite being the goddess of love, also found herself consumed by her own vanity and impulsiveness, exactly like many human figures who, blinded by desire or pride, end up facing their falls. An example of this is the myth of Narcissus, who falls in love with his own image reflected in the water, unable to see beyond his own desire. Narcissus, just like Aphrodite, is taken by beauty and seduction, but his inability to look beyond himself leads him to destruction. In the end, obsession with oneself consumes him, and he distances himself from the real world. This story can be seen as a reflection of Aphrodite's impulsive choices, who, by giving in to lust and desire, ends up creating chaos around her. Finally, a mythological figure that fits well within the parallels of Aphrodite's story is Pandora. Pandora, the first woman created by the gods, received a box containing all the evils of the world. When she opened the box, she brought misery and destruction to mortals. Pandora's curiosity, which led her to open the box, reflects the same type of impulse that led Aphrodite to betrayal. an uncontrollable desire to explore, to experience, without considering the consequences. Both Pandora and Aphrodite deal with the results of a desire that becomes destructive, affecting not only their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. Thus, the story of Aphrodite and Ares, with all its implications of love, lust, betrayal, and regret, is part of a mythological tradition where the pursuit of pleasure and personal satisfaction often becomes the catalyst for the greatest downfalls. The lessons from these stories continue to be told and retold, echoing through the ages, always warning about the cost of yielding to passions without thinking of the consequences. The story of Aphrodite and Ares, marked by intense passions, betrayals, and profound consequences, did not end with a simple conclusion or redemption. In fact, its legacy endured, shaping the perception of both gods and mortals through the ages. Their intertwined destinies and human failings, despite being gods, became an example of the complex emotions and the consequences of choices, influencing not only Olympus, but also the stories of men. Aphrodite, even after the public humiliation and breakup with Ares, managed to regain her place in the pantheon. She was once again revered, but now with a deeper wisdom. Instead of just being the goddess of love and beauty, she became also the goddess of reflection on emotional bonds. Those who worshipped her began to seek her guidance on the balance between desire and loyalty, between true love and selfishness. She, who once represented pure and irrational attraction, now symbolized the complexity of human love, with its joys and pains. On the other hand, Ares, the god of war, never fully escaped the shadow of his mistake. His power to fight in battles was always unquestionable, but his reputation as an impulsive and irresponsible lover followed him throughout his existence. He became a symbol of unbridled passion, but also of the fury born from guilt and regret. While he continued to be an important figure in Olympus, there was always an implicit lesson in his presence. Violence and war can be controlled, but uncontrolled emotions can lead to destruction, not only on the battlefield, but in the souls of the gods themselves. The relationship between Aphrodite and Ares remained distant, but on rare occasions there were signs that both still felt the overwhelming attraction for each other. However, neither of them ever again gave in to the same boundless passion of before. Their lives became an eternal reminder that desire, when not tempered by reason, can be as dangerous as any war fought on the battlefield. Hephaestus, in turn, found solace in his work. He continued to create wonders for Mount Olympus, perfecting his skills and crafting even more incredible machines and armor. The pain that once seemed unbearable was replaced by the silent strength of someone who, despite being wounded, knew that his true power lay in his ability to transform pain into creation. He became a figure of respect, not only for his forging skills, but also for his dignity in overcoming betrayal. His story began to be told as an example of how pain can fuel personal growth and transformation. Olympus thus carried on, with all its inhabitants now more aware of the dangers of unchecked passions. The story of Aphrodite and Ares spread not only among the gods, but also to the mortals, who began to understand that love is not just a force to be celebrated, but a powerful energy that demands responsibility and wisdom. However, the true lesson of this story wasn't just about love, betrayal, or revenge. The legacy of Aphrodite and Ares was something deeper. It reminded us that even the most powerful beings are subject to their weaknesses and passions. Each deity, despite their immortality and power, carries within them the same human emotions that govern mortals: the need for belonging, to be loved, to be recognized. Ultimately, what remained was a lesson about the impermanence of certainties, the volatility of feelings, and the importance of self-awareness. Gods may be immortal, But their stories, like those of mortals, are shaped by mistakes, regrets, and attempts to grow from failures. The story of Aphrodite and Ares, then, was not just about the fall of two great gods. It was, above all, about how love, in all its forms, can be a transformative force for both good and bad. An eternal lesson that remains alive to this day. Love can elevate us to great heights, but if unbalanced, it can also bring us down into the depths. And so, the story of Aphrodite and Ares, filled with passion and traps, continues to be told, reminding everyone that even in the most powerful figures, there is an echo of humanity, with its pains, joys, and complexities. Well, folks, we've reached the end of this fascinating journey through the story of Aphrodite and Ares, full of love, betrayal, and lessons that still resonate today. But before we go, I want to know what you thought of this story. Leave your comment below and share your opinion on the legacy of these gods who are so powerful yet so human at the same time. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button to support the channel and help us bring more content like this. And of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, take the chance to subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss any new videos about mythology, epic stories, and much more. Until next time, and remember, love and the gods are more complex than we imagine. See you soon.